Hello, hello, my awesome Psych juniors. So today we are going to go ahead and keep on going with the cognitive approach. So go ahead and set up your notes. Today we are learning about the effect of culture on memory. So go ahead and set that up. 3.8 effect of culture on memory. And then for your question, I want you to think about, and if you can, pause this video and write about how do you think culture impacts memory? Why do you think that? And do you have any personal examples or examples that we've learned in class already? So go ahead, pause, write about that, and then meet me back here. Okay. So please feel free to log on to office hours on Thursday from 1:30 to 2 to share what you learned and talk about the answers to these questions. I know that office hour is a different time. I have a meeting at 2, so just for tomorrow, we'll do office hours from 1:30 to 2. So please log on and let me know how you're doing and what you're learning. Okay, so let's jump in. What are our guiding questions? Our guiding question for today is, how does culture impact memory? And also, the cool thing about this concept is it really is going to show you how the sociocultural approach and the cognitive approach connect, which will make your writing on the IB test a lot stronger when you can connect these different approaches together. So you'll be tested on this next year, and it matters in life. Culture can and will play a huge role in the way that you remember things, and it can even color and distort our own memories. We learned about the role of culture and how it impacts the way we remember things through schema theory as well. So culture really can change how you remember things. And then I found this cartoon, which I thought was so funny. It says long-term memory, and then we have a neuron here with some pretty dope sunglasses saying, nope, this zone is only allowed for cat videos, useless fun facts, lame jokes, and potatoes. And then exam material, useful information, important dates, trying to get to long-term memory. I know I feel like that sometimes, so I'm sure y'all do too. Okay, so let's jump right in. How might culture impact memory? If you have a chance to pause this video and go watch this really cute video of Ellen meeting Macy Hensley, you totally should. She's super cute, has a really thick Southern accent, but has this amazing ability to remember all of the presidents and a lot of fun facts about the presidents at 5 years old, which is pretty crazy. So if you have 5 minutes to watch a funny video, go watch that. I want you to think about, as you're watching it, how Macy's culture might impact her ability to do this, meaning her culture of living in the United States. How is living in the United States potentially impacting her ability to memorize all of these presidents? So go ahead, pause this, go watch that video, think about that question, then come back here. Okay. So there are a couple ways that Macy's culture might impact her ability to memorize these presidents. First of all, the topic is just simply culturally relevant for her because she is memorizing United States presidents and she lives in the United States, which makes that culturally relevant. It also is very verbal. She created a song to give those presidents meaning in her own mind. And in Western cultures, verbal memory and verbal recall is extremely important. And we're going to see today, though, how that might not necessarily be as important in other cultures. So those are just two factors that I thought of, and I'm sure you thought of more. So pop into office hours, tell me those other things you thought of. Okay, so today this is just like a little bit of a roadmap. Today we're really just learning about some really key studies that are important to know. So you're going to learn about 3 studies today that explain how culture can impact memory. And I am going to give you a summary for 2 of those studies, but I also linked the originals. So it would be best for you to use my summaries, but also look over and read the originals to make sure you understand those studies in depth. To make sure that you are capable of writing about those studies on an IB test. And sometimes that takes more than just my summary. That takes writing my summary in your notes, but then also reading the originals. So make sure you look at the originals as well. And then the 3rd study you're going to do on your own. You're going to write a research description for yourself. That's kind of your activity for the day. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. I wanted this to appear slowly, but I messed it up apparently. That's okay. So the first study that we're talking about today is Cole and Scribner. They completed this study in the 1970s and 1974. Their aim was that they used an emic approach to study how culture impacts memory. If you remember that emic versus eidetic approach, emic is the much more culturally centered approach, where you're much more culturally sensitive, more subjective, whereas the eidetic approach is more of a ethnocentric approach. But they did use an emic approach, which is good, to study the effect of schooling on strategies that children use to memorize a list of words. The way they did this is they were studying the development of memory among rural Liberian children and US children. Of the rural Liberian children, they studied children that were not attending school as well as children that were attending school. And then in US, all children are required to attend school. So children were basically given a free recall task. What that means is they were shown a large number of objects in no particular order, and then they were asked to recall the items that they remembered in any order that they wish, which is why we call that free recall. And they showed the children objects that appear to fall into 4 very distinct categories. They did that on purpose. They wanted to see if these kids would categorize the objects that they saw. So if you look over here on the right, this is the different words that they used and objects that they showed. So they showed things that you might see in a kitchen: plate, pot, pan, cup. They showed foods: potato, onion, banana, orange, coconut. I skipped calabash because I'm not sure what that is. They showed them maybe these are like tools that you might use. So knives, hammers, and then they also showed them clothes. So trousers, head ties, shirt, and hats. And the sample was Liberian children, both children that were attending school and children that were not attending school, and US children. So pause if you need to, but I'm going to keep moving. So here's what they found. Cole and Scribner found that children that did not attend school showed no increase in memory performance after the age of 9 or 10. So basically they would increase their memory until about age 9 or 10, and then they would only remember about an average of 10 items, even when they practiced. The Liberian children attending school, however, learned the items rapidly, really similar to children in the US. And they also found that both the US and the Liberian school children would categorize the items to help their recall. So basically they would use chunking. They would chunk the clothes together and the food together and the tools together and the kitchen items together to help them remember. The non-school children did little chunking and little categorization. And then I added the second part because I think it's important to know. In a later study, so not in Cole and Scribner's original study, but later they presented the objects in a meaningful way as part of a story. And they found that when they did it in that way, the unschooled children recalled the objects really easily and chunked them according to the roles they played in the story. So when they gave the objects meaning in real life, they found that the unschooled children also recalled the objects really easily. And basically the study just concludes that the culture of school and schooling culture is going to impact free memory recall and impact the strategies that kids use to memorize things. And then here's my evaluation. Please feel free to add. This is kind of your place to put your own spin on things. You guys know how to evaluate studies at this point, so add the stuff that you think is important. For the strengths, this is an emic approach, which is a really big strength of studies, especially when you're studying another culture. The researchers did trial studies and they did pilot studies to make sure the words they used were not ethnocentric, meaning like only Western words. They made sure that Liberian children knew the words that they were using, and they made sure that they were culturally relevant, which helps to reduce the differences that you might see due to cultural differences. The limitation I came up with, and I'm interested to see if you can come up with more, is how important is memorizing a list of words to non-school children? I mean, also in our real life, how important is memorizing a list of words? What does that really say about us as human beings, and um, is it really important? Is what my limitation that I came up with is. Um, and with that being said, you could almost argue, even though that this study was done in the naturalistic setting, that because it's just asking kids to memorize a list of non-meaningful words, that maybe it has a low ecological validity. You could argue that. So that's your first study. You did it. Proud of you. We're going to do one more together. And you've actually heard of this study before. Kieran's 1981. I showed you a video on it. I am not sure if you guys wrote down the research description. If you did, don't do this again. But if you didn't, check back in your notes, see if you can find it in the sociocultural approach. If it's not there, then it's definitely important to write down this now because it's a really great study. So in 1981, Kieran's did a study that studied the difference in memory in Aboriginal Australians and white Australians. And the way that she did this is that she placed 20 objects on a board. Similar, actually, this is straight from her study. I found it online. 20 objects on a board and divided that board into 20 squares. And then children were able to study the board for 30 seconds. And then all these objects were removed and placed in a pile. And then the students, or the children, excuse me, were then asked to place the objects back on the board in the same arrangement. Her sample was 44 Aboriginal Australians, adolescents, and 44 white Australian adolescents. All of the participants were between the ages of 12 and 16 years old. And for both groups, there were more boys than girls in each group. So that was her sample. And let's see what Kieran's found. She found that Aboriginal children performed significantly better than the white Australian children when they were placing objects into their original locations. So what this told her is that the Aboriginal children had a much more developed visual and spatial memory compared to the white Australians who had a much more developed verbal memory. So she made the conclusion that the survival of the Indigenous Australians in the desert landscape had basically rewarded this ability to store and encode information based on visual retrieval cues rather than verbal. And her results suggest that maybe survival needs shape and reward a particular way of encoding information in memory. It's basically, her conclusion is that based on the life that you live and your day-to-day activities, you might encode memories differently. So if you're going to a westernized school where it's important for you to understand the work that you're learning in your math class or in your English class, verbal memory is probably going to be a lot more important because you are going to be remembering words and writing down words. But in the case of an Aboriginal or Indigenous Australian who is living a more hunter-gatherer lifestyle, that verbal memory is not extremely important, but visual spatial memory is, because you have to remember where different landmarks are in order to survive. And so that's basically her conclusion. Some strengths of her research was data triangulation. She not only collected the quantitative data of the number of trials that adolescents got correct or incorrect, but she also collected a lot of qualitative data on the way that children interacted with the board, and the way that children seem to memorize. And if you go and read the original, you can read some of that qualitative data that's quite interesting. And some limitations. It's a quasi-experiment because her independent variable was culture. It was being Aboriginal or being white. So because it's quasi and because she can't actually change the independent variable, she's just utilizing it, we can only establish correlation. You cannot establish causation in this case. It's also a relatively small sample size and would need to be replicated to be able to generalize the findings. And I have shown you this video before, but it is about Kieran's research. It's a little bit old, but it's a pretty cool, good video. So feel free to watch it again. I linked it on the Google Classroom to help remind yourself of her work and to help kind of solidify that study in your brains, in your verbal memory. And last but not least, your activity for today. Basically, what I want you to do is read the study linked on Google Classroom, Kulkowski et al. 2011. Go ahead and read that study. And then I want you to write a research description for Kulkowski's study and put it in your notes. So yeah, go ahead and write a research description for Kulkowski's study, put it in your notes. And then I know today is actually a lot of writing with 3 pretty long studies and a good amount of reading. So your assignment is just to write down these 3 studies and then just send me a picture of your notes for this lesson on the Google Classroom. I'm making it an assignment, so you should be able to just upload a picture on the Google Classroom assignment and click turn in, because if you just email it to me, I will probably lose it. So please make sure you turn it in to the actual Google Classroom assignment. But other than that, thank y'all for popping in. I hope you have an awesome day. I hope you have a good weekend. Come to office hours today from 1:30 to 2 p.m. And make today awesome. See y'all later.